Welcome to my People Patterns and People Pleasing 101. My name's Oliver. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and this is Gogo. He's a serial people pleaser. If you want to know more about people pleasing, perhaps you identify as a people pleaser or know someone who is, stay tuned. Because in this video, I'm going to explain why Gogo here is getting an A in this class, and most humans are failing miserably. Are you done? That's not keeping me happy. I just told them you were a people pleaser, dude. In my private practice, I help a lot of clients work through their people-pleasing tendencies, and in this video, I'm going to show you how I think about people-pleasing and how I help clients break free of some of the mental traps that we fall into when we're people-pleasers. Gogo's got the best mindset when it comes to people-pleasing because he knows I'm the food guy. I give him breakfast and dinner, the occasional treat. Gogo keeps me happy because he doesn't want those things to stop. When he sees it's the food guy asking him to do something, he'll likely comply because he knows he's going to get something out of it. Either a treat, or a pet, or a belly rub, or some praise, and all of those things feel really good to him. Another way to think of this is he's putting his self above, or at least in an equal position to other. Let me explain.
Imagine that we have an internalized sense of self and others. Our sense of self is pretty straightforward. It's knowing who we are, what we like, what our values are, and what we need to do in order to get along on the planet on a day-to-day basis. Our internalized representation of others starts from birth when we start to realize that our caregivers are very important to us to bring us food, keep us warm, comfort us when we're scared. And this is why us therapists are so interested in your childhood years, as this internalized version of your primary caretaker is the most influential other that we have. Having both an internalized sense of self and an internalized sense of other people means we can have and be in relationship with other people and, of course, our dogs. We not only remember that other people exist, but we remember names, faces, memories, relationship dynamics, and so on and so forth. This comes in quite handy when it comes to me remembering what my dog looks like when I pick him up from daycare, or even that I have a dog at all. I'm fairly certain that this is true for dogs too, as Gogo seems to remember me when I pick him up from daycare, and of course that I'm good for treats, cuddles, hours of playing tug, throwing squirrel around and playing with bear. Our sense of self should in general be in balance with our sense of other people, but throughout the day this varies, so as much as these videos may suggest otherwise, I am not constantly thinking of my dog, especially when I'm at work. When I'm with a client, my internalized sense of Gogo goes on the back burner so I can think of the client and what's going on with them. And when we're at work, our sense of self in general gets put on the back burner as we prioritize what our boss wants or what the job is demanding of us. When someone we care about is sick, we might spend more time at work thinking about them than the job. So in this case, the other might be our loved one who's sick versus work. These are all totally normal and appropriate ways that self and others shift priority throughout the day. Problems come in relationships and in ourselves when things get stuck. For example, we probably don't want to be in a relationship with someone where we are the other in this person's mind. I can imagine this feeling quite lonely when you're with someone who's more concerned with themselves. There's not really a partnership. And if you haven't guessed it yet, the opposite of this scenario is what takes us back to people pleasing. People pleasers prioritize others over their self. And if you're in a relationship and you're a people pleaser, you still might feel lonely, unheard, and ignored, but this time it is due to the overemphasis on others and a lack of self in a relationship. This is what I mean when I say my dog has got this whole people pleasing thing right. His self and others seem to be in pretty decent proportion. He's getting something out of it and he's doing it because he cares about me, I hope. So outside of dating and relationships, here's an example of people pleasing and how the self and other thing works. One of the things I do outside of being a therapist is I teach, and in my first grad school class teaching clinical psychology, I walk into the classroom and had a real people pleasing moment. Fortunately for me, the school that I teach at has really small classes, so there were only about 20 students in the room. So I pushed through my imposter syndrome and anxiety, say hello and set myself up. One of the students throws me by calling me professor and tells me that they got me a chair, and without thinking and being in a people pleaser mode, I take a seat and say thank you. But actually, I don't like sitting down when I'm presenting. In fact, I need to stand up in order to think properly. So what happens is I end up standing up and sitting down for the first 45 minutes of this 2-hour lecture. All because my people-pleasing kicked in. In this incident, my other was the students there, and I guess I was more preoccupied thinking about being polite, making the right impression, making sure they like me, not wanting to be rude, and not wanting to hurt anyone's feelings. When I was able to rebalance myself and other to more accurate proportions, I realized that I didn't actually have to use the chair, and no one's feelings were going to be hurt if I stood up the whole time. Using this metaphor of scales is exactly what I teach my clients in private practice. It's not that the scales have to be balanced 100% of the time, it's just that the distribution has to be appropriate to the situation. So you can ask yourself where your thoughts are focusing. Are they on self or are they on other? Then ask if the scales are appropriately balanced. Like, do you need to be focused so much on other or self, or can you afford to redistribute things? Let's take a look at some other people-pleasing scenarios through the lens of this self and other model. One of the most common signs of people-pleasing is a fear of conflict or conflict avoidance. And in this case, the people-pleaser is terrified of upsetting the other person. Standing up for themselves is somehow going to hurt or wound the other person, so they generally tend to avoid it. This leads into the second point, which is love comes from others. There's an expectation with people-pleasers that their self-sacrifice will somehow pay off, and they will gain love, or balance between self and other will become more equal when they have just given enough or made enough sacrifices. And this, of course, is a fallacy, because you actually lose respect when you don't stand up for yourself and always go with the flow and never insert your opinion. The last scenario I want to look at is people-pleasing and parenting, and it comes from a comment that I got on one of my videos, and I hope this answers the question. In a healthy family, I've got parents who are not people-pleasing, and there is a nice solid boundary separating them from the children. When we introduce a people-pleaser, and for the sake of the argument we'll say it's dad, lots of things happen to this family. The first thing is, because he's a people pleaser, the boundaries get more porous between dad and the kids. A parent that can't hold boundaries with their kids is essentially a people pleaser. This person is going to have difficulty disciplining, implementing consequences, and are going to turn a blind eye to rules being broken. Assuming mom is not a people pleaser, this is going to lead to some difficulties in the marriage. Literally, mom and dad are not on the same page, with mom enforcing rules and dad letting rules slide. It's not uncommon for parents with this situation to come into my office very resentful at each other with very little communication going on. Over time, this means that there's going to be a soft, hard split between the parents, with mum overcompensating with rules and consequences to make up for dad. This means that the kids can start acting out because they get away with things when dad's on duty, so it's highly probable you will see some oppositional behaviors from one of the kids. And this can look like anything from school refusal to drugs to rule breaking, grades dropping, and oppositional behaviors. Because mum is overcompensating for dad, she's going to be tougher or more critical of the kids. That means that you've got an increase in conflict going on with one of the kids, especially the one that's acting out. And when there's more conflict, there's more stress and tension, and everybody feels that, making this household really uncomfortable to live in. This overlaps into parental accommodation, where we accommodate someone else's behaviors to avoid conflict or drama or tension in the household. So going back to the comment on my YouTube page, which I assume was from a parent who was talking about having difficulty setting structure and boundaries. The other is the kids in this case, and they are well out of proportion from self. A parent who is people-pleasing in this way is behaving in a way that says that their kids' feelings are more important than setting rules or enforcing consequences. And this, of course, is just not true. Kids need rules. They need consequences to learn. Another message being transmitted is that the kids' needs are more important than their own, which is true to some degree. But essentially, kids need to see their parents both as loving and caring and as providing structure and boundaries. You can't just be one or the other. Sometimes parents will back away from enforcing rules or consequences just to keep the peace, and this is a complete disservice to the kid, who needs to know that there are consequences for their behaviors. Parenting often goes beyond childhood, so you're actually giving life lessons in these moments. If a child doesn't get consequences for failing to do their chores, how will they know in their first job that not doing the work assignment that the boss asked them will result in them being fired? A good parent is both part friend and part boss. You cannot be 100% friend, you cannot be 100% boss. It has to be a middle ground. So your actual job as a parent is to provide structure and discipline and is to enforce consequences, however you choose to do that. So far, my help has been a lot of scare tactics and tough love. And that's only because it's so important for parents to understand the damage or potential damage that could go on when their self and other boxes are not balanced. Another way of thinking about this is to completely flip this upside down. Sometimes I'll tell a people-pleasing parent that they're being quite selfish and making it about them when they refuse to set boundaries or follow up on rules. If you think about it, in this case, they are choosing not to do these things that they know they should because they don't want to be distressed, anxious, or upset watching their kids have an emotional reaction. So that completely blows this whole people-pleasing thing up in their heads, and my hope is that it shifts things around so that they feel more empowered to set boundaries. And in the words of the goddess Brené Brown, the most loving people are the most boundaried. So actually, to be loving, to be kind, to be compassionate, you do have to have boundaries. So once again, if you enjoyed this or just like GoGo, please subscribe, follow, like, share, sign up on mypeoplepatterns.com. We've got some great plans for the rest of the year with videos, content, books, you name it, it's coming your way. So be the first to know by liking and following us. One of the things on mypeoplepatterns.com that you can go and do right now is take the Toxic Traits quiz and sign up for our mailing list. You get a whole bunch of tools and exercises emailed to you, as well as finding out if your relationship has any toxic traits. You could also take the conflict quiz on mypeoplepatterns.com and find out what your pattern of conflict is. And again, you can sign up for the email list and we send you a whole bunch of tools and information on deepening your connection with your partner and resolving conflict in healthier ways.